Good afternoon. I actually want to slow the whole thing down, and I don't want to activate anything. And I want us to think about community not as something that we do, but something that we are. So too often, especially with youth and young people, we like to engage young people as leaders, but we want to engage them into communities that are not ready for them, that are adultist communities, or that communities of power and privilege that are actually not quite ready to handle the voice of a youth. So before we activate anything, and before any of us go and do anything, requires great personal transformation and self-reflection as to the ways we are each contributing to the injustices we're so deeply concerned about. And to begin that, I have to throw away all of my credibility with you with an initial admission. And that is that before any big meeting or international travel or, I don't know, eHarmony date, or like before I try to cook something, I have to do a little bit of new agey spirituality, and I read tarot. Now, I don't actually read tarot because I'm not that legitimate. I have a deck, I pull from it, and then I run over to my bookshelf and I grab the book that tells me what the tarot card means. And before the last international travel that I took, I pulled out the Four of Swords. I know, someone knows. Truths. And for someone that studied peer mediation in high school, so for example, kids would ditch and like make out and get action, and I would be mediating someone. I know mediation, but nothing has ever put it so beautifully as this tarot card. And they said that to create a truce, or to create harmony and generosity of spirit, requires that we show up, we pay attention, we speak truth, and we let go of the outcome. Now, whenever I've done speeches to people about youth-led organizing, the first bit of advice I give about youth is that you have to say yes and you have to show up. Now, this card, however, kind of complicates that, and my previous adage complicates the card. To show up at all requires that you said yes to showing up, and to let go of outcomes says that you're saying yes to the possibility of no. And community says that when someone tells you no, you say yes. You affirm their no because their no is so worthy to you. Now, I was not always a yes gal. I'm from Moreno Valley, California. And if you don't know where that is, that's the point. It's a small place outside of Riverside. And I grew up with these things that my loving parents called Sam's nervous stomachs. Now, Sam's nervous stomachs meant that I would want to vomit at a phone call. And I would want to vomit on a long car drive to Riverside. And I would want to vomit if I saw something other than fruit and salad. Fries scared me. So there's no reason I should be here today at all. I can't count how many hours I spent with my mom running to bathroom floors for vomit that never came, all out of fear. Now, my fear, unfortunately, gripped me so much that it was a protection fear. What was I so afraid of? Wanting to live in my suburban, predominantly white community of Moreno Valley, California. How did I come out of that? Well, I was blessed with an alchemy of mentors who showed up and they paid attention and they spoke their truth, but they were not attached to the outcome of me. I was not supposed to be some cookie cutter that they wanted to create. I was just part of an ongoing process that was also part of their process. And so luckily, over time, and not vomiting that much, I ended up in India with my partner. Of course I was scared, and you would think this would be a bad idea, going to India with this whole nervous stomach thing. But I went, and I have to admit to you that I was the first person to throw up in India. I was on education abroad. I hadn't eaten anything yet. It was my first day in New Delhi, and I was vomiting all over the bathroom floor of a hotel room. And I remember sitting there in my vomit and my tears, my first day for 6 months in India, thinking, who's going to clean this up? And what that really meant is actually I was afraid to go out that door and admit to the man at the front desk that I had vomited in his country because I was afraid. But that's not it. It got worse. That first time in India for 6 months, I ended up with an illness the 5th month in that the doctors in India didn't even know what it was. I had fevers every night of 105, my liver was swelling, and nothing they did stopped it, and I was afraid. And so afraid was I that I was medically evacuated out of South India back to Riverside, California, where when I stepped off the plane, I never had another fever. India didn't make me sick. I made me sick. My fear made me sick. And what we are when we are people of privilege sometimes is that we are actually making ourselves sick with fear. And perhaps that is fear of losing the small amount of power that we have in a world that feels so tumultuous. But community potentially is the antidote to that fear. Potentially the antidote to that fear is saying yes and showing up and paying attention. Now, 3 years later, I'm a little bit better about this showing up thing, and I've started a nonprofit child leader project, and I've gone to India maybe 4 or 5 times. I'm not vomiting anymore, thank God. We're doing great work, and I'm in India, but unfortunately at that point I had not gotten good about dating, and I was dating a fool of a man in India who chose temple over me, and I decided then on that note that I was going to show up, and I had this feeling that I should just go to a beach. And so I got on my Scooty Pep. If you're from India, you know Scooty Pep. I was on my Scooty Pep, and I drove 10 kilometers down the road out of the town. And then I took a right at some point, and I'm going right. And then I find a beach, and I take 20 meters down, and I sit somewhere I've never been before. And as I'm sitting there, responding to this crazy call just to go to the beach, a young man walks up to me. And at this point, I'm like, oh no. And 3 years prior, I would have thrown up on the man. But I'm not doing that anymore. And I'm just sitting there hoping he doesn't talk to me. And he does, and he says, noticing that I'm watching some children, do you like children? But my fear still plays tricks, and I think he says, do you want drugs? And I go, no, I don't want drugs. He's like, no, do you like children? Yeah, I do child organizing. This young man, who would soon become my brother, Shiva, and I have been working now together for nearly 2.5 years. And that night, he invited me to his village to see his child collective organize on their own without curriculum or grants or 501c3 status or an office with paper and pens and bunk beds for interns. They just organized youth, children. But when I got there, these kids were so empowered, they grilled me. And they were like, who are you and what are you doing here and what have you to offer us? What are you doing in America? And I had to speak truth at that point. I pay taxes. I wasn't doing anything else. And I learned from my brothers and sisters in India that, in fact, some of the worst advocacy that we are known to do, especially when we have the privilege of travel and the privilege to spend time on this work, is something akin to this. Sometimes we see someone else's kiddie pool and we call it underdeveloped. We call it marginalized. We call it poor. And we judge it. And so we march ourselves over there and we land in their kiddie pool and we swim around for a little bit until we either get bored with them or angry at them for not doing what we want them to do. And then we pee and we leave. Sometimes I've seen development look like this. It's an advocacy of evacuation. It's not about a commitment to a community and a place and a people. It's about what I feel like doing. We can no longer afford to have advocacy evacuation. We can no longer afford as activists, as activators, to try to slam social justice into 9-hour days, or to try to package it into a grant, or to try to put it in an office or into a TED Talk. Advocacy and social change in community is fundamentally every single choice that you make at every single moment. That you make that choice. Now, as I'm figuring this whole advocacy thing out, I'm asking myself these questions and wondering what I can do. In Riverside, we work in a community called Arlanza. Near the end of our first year of programming with leadership development, one of the youth asks, oh, well, we'll see you around, right? Because you're not coming back next year. The advocacy of evacuation. Don't leave the community. Because the reality is, the paddling pool we just played in and peed in is actually the same pool that we're standing in right now. The pools aren't actually that different. And in fact, we know that the community is something you can't run away from. The community is all around you and in every choice we make. And in fact, the local and the global has no choice. The choice itself was the illusion in the first place. Thinking we could choose between us and them has been the problem all along. Thinking that they were different at all was the problem all along. Now, there's an incredible leader that I enjoy quoting, Ivan Illich. Critic, educator, amazement. And he was addressing this group of volunteers from the United States and Mexico in 1968. And he was speaking to this group of well-intentioned, privileged, predominantly middle and upper class folks in Mexico. And he gave his famous speech, "To hell with good intentions," where he literally begs these folks to leave Mexico immediately and at least go talk to people that they can respond to. And he accuses them and says, you're no good integrating your kindness back at your hometown than you would be in Mexico. And in fact, all you have to export is a middle-class American way of life that might not be alive enough to be shared. And instead, he says, if you want to work among the poor, if indeed that is your vocation, work among the poor that can tell you to go to hell. And when I repeat this to some interns in our programs in Riverside, what they'll say to me is, that means we should try harder, right? That's the problem. The problem is not that we try harder. The problem is that we shut up and we sit still and we pay attention and we speak truth and we don't be attached to the outcome. But don't be attached to the outcome. That's not good for grant writers. And that's not good for a lot of us very hardworking folks that are working and organizing to create justice in our world. But when we have been told in an old paradigm that the only good thing worth doing is the thing you get credit for, or the thing you get paid for, or the thing that you can classify, organize, rewrite, and post on our websites, we have a huge problem at hand to release our need for outcomes and just commit to the place and the people in front of us. And if we commit to that, we have a greater opportunity. Now, this most recent trip to India was a hard trip to India because for the first time in 4 years, the Indian and USA teams were struggling with each other. But the struggle is the real relationship. We have to pull, like wares from a merchant's box, the woundedness we have inherited being part of this planet. And as my Indian brothers and sisters unveiled the woundedness of colonization and hard work and the assumption that, honestly, the American team might be here just to take advantage of us. And as the American team pulls out of their pockets the realities of all the assumptions we have been given about quote-unquote underdevelopment, which is a lie, we lay it on this table, this buffet of baloney, and we still choose that it is worth working together in community than going alone in bitterness. So if there is anything we can do to build community and to activate anything, what we have to do first is to be still and to imagine a world where someone's yes and someone's no are of equal worth. And a community in India, and a community in SkidRow, and a community in Arlanza, Riverside, California, can say no, and that no is held with such high integrity and is held with such respect that it is respected. That's when you know you're in community. When you can say no to someone and they still love you. To begin, we have to stop peeing in each other's pools and vomiting in each other's restrooms. And we have to be able to say yes, no, yes. Thank you.